These are the two best lightweight telephoto lenses that Nikon offers for the Z mount. But which one is better for landscape photography? What's up y'all, it's Project Photography back with another video, and today this is the Nikon 24-200mm f4 to 6.3, and this has been my main landscape photography lens for my telephoto use cases, at least for the past couple of years, until I upgraded to this Nikon Z 28-400mm f4 to 8 VR. And man, this lens is absolutely insane, but one of the biggest differences between these two lenses is the focal length. So let's start there when comparing these lenses. And right off of the bat, the first thing that we can notice is that the 28-400 is 200mm longer than the 24-200. Now this makes a huge difference when capturing telephoto images, because a lot of our subject matters will be a lot farther away when it comes to mountain peaks, faraway beach cliff sides, and other elements that may not be that close. And that's where a telephoto lens really comes in. Whatever is essentially visible to the human eye, we are able to capture with the 20-400, whereas a lot of the times with the 24-200, I did not feel that way because I felt like 200mm was just a little bit shorter than what I would want. But one of the other major differences when it comes to focal length is the 24-200 is 4mm wider than the 28-400. Now, this may not sound like that big of a difference, but to me, when I'm using a lot of my wide-angle lenses, I can definitely tell the difference between 24 and 28. 24 is just a little bit wider. It exaggerates more of the elements that you have in your frame, whereas 28mm is a little bit tighter, and it feels a little bit closer to a normal focal length than something like a 24mm, which definitely feels like a wide-angle lens. Now, I think this is going to be a bigger difference if you're just using these lenses by themselves, because for landscape photography, I am going to be pairing it with a wide-angle lens like a 14-30, which has quite a bit of overlap actually with the 24-200. But let's say you're going out and you're just using one lens by itself and you're kind of traveling with one camera, then I feel like the 24-200 with its wide angle really does make a bigger difference because of that extra 4mm. You're just able to get more into the frame. But if you're looking at these two lenses and thinking, okay, like, is the 4mm on the wide end really worth trading off an extra 200mm on the long end with the 20-400? And my answer is no. I feel like having the extra 200mm on the 20-400 is definitely a major advantage over the extra 4mm on the wide angle for the 24-200. I mean, this is a telephoto lens and you are going to be using it for those use cases. So having the extra 200mm really makes a massive difference when you're out there capturing landscape photography. But something else major to point out is the apertures on both these lenses. The 24-200 goes to 6.3 at the long end, whereas the 20-400 goes to f8 on the long end. Now that's about 2/3 of a stop difference, and that honestly does make quite a big difference because I like to stop down my lenses at least by one stop. So the 6.3, I just normally stop it down to f8. I know that's not a full stop, but I just stop it down to f8, and I found the performance to be incredible when it comes to the image quality. Whereas with the 20-400, if I want to get the best image quality, I have to stop it down to f11. Now that is a pretty big difference in my opinion because f8 and f11 are both pretty dark apertures, but f11 is just like that much darker of an aperture, just one stop, and that does make quite a big difference, especially if you're shooting things like panoramas. You want to get the best vignetting performance as well as sharpness and stuff, so that does make quite a big difference and maybe a reason why some people may like the 24-200. But if I'm being real, 99.9% of the time you are going to be using a tripod for landscape photography, so I don't know how much of a difference that really makes. The biggest difference you'll probably see is when you're shooting those panoramas because you do want a little bit faster of a shutter speed. But one of the other major differences between these two lenses is its ergonomics, and as you can see, the 24-200 is much smaller than the 28-400. The difference is about 1.1 inches between the 24-200 and then the 28-400. Now, the biggest difference that this will make is when you're packing it inside of your bag. Now, when I'm packing it inside of my 3-liter sling, I have more than enough room with the 24-200 and it actually fits quite comfortably. Whereas with the 20-400, it is pretty tight in there and you really feel like, okay, this thing takes up the entire bag without giving you much wiggle room at all. In that one bag sort of setup where you're just carrying that one lens, I really feel like the 24-200 does have that advantage, especially when it comes to its form factor. But when you're packing it inside of, let's just say, a Shimoda bag where it's meant for landscape photography and you're going to be packing in a bunch of other stuff, yes, you do need to add a little bit more room for the 20-400, but it's not exorbitant amount of room. And I felt like it fits pretty comfortably when I'm packing it with a bunch of other stuff. Now, when I've been talking about these lenses height, I've mainly been talking about it when it's compacted down to its wide angle side. But when you extend both these lenses out, the 28-400 is actually a roughly 2 inches longer than the 24-200. And I feel like this makes a big difference, especially when you're using it on smaller camera bodies like the Nikon Z30. When you're zooming out with the 24-200, it definitely balances a lot better with that smaller camera body versus the 20-400. When I'm using the Z30 with the 20-400, it's just really lens heavy. Even when you're zooming it out, I mean, it's not that pleasant of an experience, and because the lens will tilt down, and that means the composition as a whole will tilt down, you have to adjust for it. So that's something you definitely have to keep in mind when you're going to be pairing these lenses with the respective camera bodies, either a smaller one or a bigger one. But if you are using the 20-400 with a bigger full frame body like a Z6 III, it does actually balance pretty well. It's just when it comes to smaller camera bodies, something you definitely have to be cognizant of. Now, something else major to note about these two lenses is the weight. The 24-200 comes in at 570 grams versus the 28-400 comes in at 725 grams. That's about a 27% difference between the weight. And honestly, it does make a difference, especially when you're balancing it with your different cameras on your tripod. But when it comes to actually putting it inside of your landscape bag, I really feel like you're not going to make that big of a difference. I mean, when I pack all my stuff inside my landscape bag, it ends up being about like 30 pounds. So is that extra couple grams really going to make a big difference? Probably not, even though, yes, I am a big proponent of minimizing the amount of weight that is in your bag because you are going to be carrying it on your back for a long period of time. But honestly, I just don't feel like that 175 grams is really going to make that huge of a difference. You're really not going to feel that, especially when you have all that other stuff inside of your camera bag. Now, when it comes to image quality with these two lenses, I really feel like they're both on par with each other. There really isn't that many big differences when it comes to sharpness, chromatic aberration performance, the lens's micro contrast, or even the colors. The biggest differences that I can tell of is the corner sharpness. I do feel like the corner sharpness on the 20-400 is just a little bit better than the 24-200, but that's just my personal opinion. If you look at these two MTF charts, they are very similar to one another. And to be quite frank with you, you really have to be pixel peeping to even tell a smidge of a difference. And the other difference between these two lenses is the vignetting performance. I do feel like the 24-200 does perform a little bit better when it comes to vignetting versus the 20-400. And I think a major reason for the 24-200's vignetting performance probably has to do with that slightly brighter aperture of 2/3 of a stop. And now this means that you don't have to stop down as much to get better vignetting performance relative to something like the 20-400. So to me, that's probably the biggest difference between these two lenses when it comes to image quality. But in reality, these lenses really don't have that much difference when it comes to image quality, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, these lenses do perform quite well, especially given their price point and its non-S-line status. So let's jump right into conclusion and the recommendations I have for these two lenses. And to me, for a majority of landscape photographers, I do think that the 20-400 will be the better lens for landscape photography, mainly because of that longer focal length. I mean, having an extra 200 millimeters on the long end is a lot. You're able to just capture longer subject matters that are farther away from you, and that's a huge advantage because you can essentially get whatever composition you want. And I feel like because you're gonna be pairing the 20-400 with a wide angle lens anyways, I feel like that having that extra 4 millimeters longer on the wide angle side really won't make that big of a difference. But I think for a lot of photographers that want a cheaper lens, because this lens is much easier to find used on eBay than something like this lens will be cheaper. You will have a much smaller form factor, and I feel like it's a lot easier to balance with smaller lenses. And I feel like if you're a photographer that wants that one lens to travel with, actually the 24-200 might be the better choice. But if I'm being real, both lenses are great. I mean, I used the 24-200 for 2 years before upgrading to the 28-400. And honestly, I didn't really have an issue with the lens. I thought it was fantastic. I love the form factor in particular. But I mean, the 20-400 with this long focal length is just absolutely insane. You can't go wrong with either one, but it just depends which one makes the most sense for you. So anyways, guys, that is it for this video. Let me know which lens that you would prefer to have in the comment section down below, or if you have any of these lenses, let me know what you think about them. So thank you guys so much for experiencing the world with me today. Please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.